I'm Brian Carpenter, host of Fresh Air at 5, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Hey, welcome back. Steve here, and today I'm talking with Dave Koetje, a former Christian schools superintendent and president of Christian Schools International. He has 40 years in education, and he recently participated in Lead by Design, a program meant to bring leaders from different sectors of society to learn about each other's roles. What a cool opportunity this is to learn, and you're going to get some good stuff. Awesome talk. Thanks for listening. Oh, by the way, it would be so cool if you would go to my website, stephenmiletto.com/reviews, and left a review. Could you do that for me? You know, another way you could do it is go straight to Apple or whatever podcast host you listen to me on. Thanks for doing that. Enjoy the show. Boone Titanium Rings, found on the web at boonrings.com, is an affiliate partner of Teaching Learning Leading K12. And I'm also a customer. I have this really cool ring that's got these carved pistons and stars in it. I love it. They make rings of titanium that are carved, laser cut, and engraved, as well as they have inlays of many types of materials like meteorite, acrylic, wood, carbon fiber, and so many other types. They also have special collections that are incredible designs. One of the top sellers are the Gamer Rings, the Stealth Series, and the Black Zirconium. As a note, they also make earrings, pendants, cufflinks, and for you musicians, they make cool trumpet mouthpieces. Love it. Go to boonrings.com and at checkout use my code, capital T, capital L, capital K, number 12, and you'll get 10% off your purchase. So go check them out. I love my ring, and I know that you will love yours.
You are listening to Teaching Learning Leading K12, a podcast for educators, helping you help kids achieve their dreams. And now here's Steve with this week's show.
Dave Koetje served as superintendent of Grand Rapids Christian Schools and president of Christian Schools International over his 40-year career in education leadership. Dave was among K-12 and private sector business executives who completed a year-long journey during the COVID pandemic in which they immersed themselves in one another's leadership roles. Rodger Price, founder of Leading by Design in Grand Rapids, Michigan, offered the framework that led to the creation of the program. And we're going to get into this today. And Dave, I'm glad to have you here. Thanks for joining me, and say hi to everybody.
Steve, thanks for the invitation, and I'm just honored to be invited into your network today.
Well, glad to have you here. And before we talk about anything else, let's talk about you as president of Christian Schools International. Could you share a little about the why of this organization? What's it exist for?
Yeah, sure. It was probably 100 years ago when maybe 15 school leaders, and by the way, that was before my time, in case you're wondering, about 15 school leaders got together in Chicago. These were Christian school leaders at the time. Got together in Chicago and just raised the question, is there anything we could do better together than individually? And out of that congregation morphed a membership/trade organization. And 100 years later, that organization does three primary things for its member schools. It has a division on leadership development and governance, where its focus there is on executive leadership development, identifying prospective school leaders, taking them into some introductory stuff, as well as board governance. Over the last 15 years, while I was there, we began to spend a significant amount of time just looking at the interface between the boardroom and the senior executive leadership space. So leadership development is one division. Another division, school improvement and accreditation. We developed a relationship with advanced ed. Most of our schools, being Christian schools, wanted a faith-based overlay too on what it was they were doing. And so we developed this interesting relationship with advanced ed where when our schools were accredited, they were accredited by us as well as advanced ed. And then a division on learning services, and that just, as needs changed, the focus of that thing changed, developed some product on occasion, but most of that was conversation around how we do our work. So mostly not North American. Right now, there's probably 400 or so schools that are part of the network.
Very, very cool. Very cool. I appreciate you sharing that. That's awesome. One of the things I got to make sure I ask you, you've had over a 40-year career in education leadership. I mean, what do you like about serving in this capacity?
I get that question answered a lot. It wasn't what do I like? It was always what did I like? So I retired in 2015, and I'm often asked the question, "So Dave, what do you miss the most?" And quite frankly, when I reflect on that, what I miss most about the K-12 space was the mess that I was always a part of. So the mess, so how do you serve all kids regardless of learning complexities? How do you do that? How do you navigate conflicting expectations in a school community? How do you gather collective energy to push against this powerful inertia in schools to have tomorrow look just like yesterday? How do you develop a sense of passion for tomorrow in a kid who simply has no dream for tomorrow? I love the opportunity to help shape a place of sanctuary for kids where someday they would reflect back and know what an influence that particular school had on them. And today, as a coach and a trainer, I'm honored, quite frankly, to be brought back into that same mess.
That is so cool because education is exactly that. And it's never a dull moment if you're someone who cares and wants to do what's right by kids. And so I love the way you're describing it as that mess, because it is. It's how do I get into this mess?
Right, exactly. And why do I like it?
And why do I like it? Yes, right. I did this to myself. Exactly. That's what
That's right.
You have those conversations with people. You say, I just want to remind you that I was not forced to take this position. Okay,
that's right. Yeah, I chose this mess. Right.
I like that. That's awesome. Yeah. All right. So part of what we're talking about here is that you participated in a group that's in a program that's Leading by Design, founded by Rodger Price. Can you tell us a little bit about what its purpose is and how you got involved?
Yeah. So you can imagine, Steve, after 40 years in the business, I touched a lot of capacity growing opportunities through, you name it, courses, conferences, workshops, on and on and on and on. When I was introduced to Rodger, I was intrigued because here's this engineer who was intrigued by this notion that learning is a function of just taking a few key concepts of effective leadership and then contextualizing those concepts into one's own personal experience, and then take a deep dive reflecting on those experiences, and then just thoughtfully reflect on what have I done differently, or what will I do differently when I experience something similar to this in the future. I was impressed with his pedagogy. When I told him that, he said, "I have no idea what you mean when you say pedagogy. What does that mean?"
That's awesome.
And so I had to explain to him, well, that's probably education jargon, but I was impressed with this notion where these folk would just throw out a concept, and then in small groups. When I say small, I'm talking small. The cohorts were like 9 people, 9 men and women, and those 9 were divided into 3 groups of 3. And so in that group of 3, you take that little nugget of what somebody says is a piece of effective leadership, and you just ask, so how does that work for you? What are you thinking about when you think about this? And when doesn't it work for you? And then in addition to that, then a coach comes alongside of each of these participants to take a deeper dive into those concepts. And then these are questions like, so what are you thinking about now when you think about that particular concept? When you think about moving forward, what goes through your head? What might you do differently? And then a really powerful nugget enters into it. As a coach, you say, you wouldn't mind if I just shot you a note in a couple of weeks just to see how you're doing on that, would you? And what's powerful about that, and actually that was to me, that was the trump card of leading by design, was the sense that most leaders know what to do. They just don't take the time to do it. And if you have somebody kind of coming alongside of you and just nudging you, say, hey, yeah, you mentioned 2 weeks ago you were thinking about you were going to do this. How's that going for you now? So 400 industry leaders in throughout Western Michigan have participated in this program over the last 4 or 5 years or so. And they still keep talking about how this experience has made them a better leader. So Rodger asked me if I'd be willing to be part of a small team and just form an opinion on whether or not this particular framework would work and make sense in the education space. So that's what we're about doing now.
That is really cool, because just by reading what I know about it, it makes sense to be able to have these types of discussions, which we're going to get into in a second. But I just that's awesome. Thank you. And just to kind of take it into some more specifics here. I mean, you were among a group of K through 12 and private sector business executives who finished this group. You participated in the Leading by Design group. And, is there something that you'll take away from that you hope you never forget? I mean, that's just something you'll always remember about the experience? Sure.
Again, remember that I don't know that I ever had an opportunity in my 40 years to do leadership thinking in a group that included someone other than educators like myself who were thinking about leadership. And so this kind of homogeneous group called educational leaders, we come together and we reflect and we ponder. And there's a sense sometimes that, we're like second cousins to the real leaders out there. And we feel that way sometimes because, you get beat up a little bit in the media and everybody has an opinion on education and so forth. So now here we are. We're sitting here with industry leaders thinking about the same stuff. And so your question about what do I remember? Here's what I remember. I remember how good it felt when we started to wrestle with how important it was to think about this kind of razor sharp focus on mission and purpose, where the industry leaders were saying, you guys think about that a lot more than we do. I mean, actually, you guys are pretty good at that. And then another memory was, part of the content is talking about how everything is connected to everything else, living systems. And we begin to talk about all of these affinity groups, that we have in the education space, of which there are numerous. And our industry leaders are saying, my goodness, your work is so complicated. When we close the office in Toledo, the only people who care are the people who worked in the office in Toledo. When you decide to close a neighborhood school, you're getting letters from grandparents 2,000 miles away.
I love it. Yes.
And so that was kind of affirming. All of a sudden, we education leaders are saying, I think we know something about this thing called organization and organization growth. The flip side of that coin was finding myself thinking about stuff I never thought about before, like differentiation. So how does your school differentiate itself from all the other schools in the community? I never thought of that. We're just schools, And I went on everybody's webpage, and everybody says excellence, and everybody says growth. Everybody uses the same words. It kind of sounds like you're all alike. And that challenge to look at your collection of assets, both monetary assets and human assets, and saying, okay, what's going to differentiate us from the rest of the pack, was interesting conversation to get involved in. And then this return on investment, we in education don't think about it too much, although my background was faith-based school, so I always had to compete against free. And so we thought about that a bit. But that notion of value add was an interesting concept, one that, quite frankly, I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about until I was part of this group. So those are 3 or 4 things that came to my mind as a result of your question. All right, so what are you likely never to forget? Those are the things I will never forget, having been part of this.
That's awesome. I love it. I mean, it's just, it's, by the way, you made me think of, I'm pretty sure most of the other industries don't get letters from relatives, especially after graduation, who want to explain to you
That's right.
how they wish that it had
That's
gone.
Right.
And
That's right. That is true. That is true. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. And so just as a side note, I've had my share of those. And some of them very impactful too. That's
Sure.
But, good stuff. I like that. That's neat because, it is interesting when people can, just feel like they don't belong or something like this. And then when you come together, start identifying some similarities or where, things that are, different. And but at the same time, the decisions that we're starting to make, or having to make, where it's impressing them a little bit, I guess, because of this type of stuff you have to deal with.
I think so.
That's cool stuff. One of the things let's talk briefly about the idea that leadership skills can be inherent, but often need to be learned, whether by experience or through participating in leadership development. Can you kind of go with that just a little bit? I mean, this idea that
I don't know that one is just. I do know that one is just not born a leader, but there may be some instinct that draws us into leadership positions for one reason or another. But when you ask me in your question and you include that word experience, what experience gives us, there is no doubt in my mind that we learn because we want to change behavior. So we do leadership development because we want to become more effective leaders. We want to change our behavior. And that happens in this way, I believe. And I think this is true. I think 70% of what I learn when I think about how do I improve myself tomorrow is based on a reflection of my own past experiences. 70%. 20% comes from the feedback that I get from others. And 10% comes from reading a book, going to a conference, taking a course. And we've got science to back that up. So when you think about learning, you say, okay, what does it take? 90% of learning is reflecting on experience and listening to others talk to us about our work. There are precious few training programs out there that understand that power and that reality. And that's what caught my attention when I was introduced to Rodger Price. You can't ignore content. But quite frankly, 90% of my growth and development is more on my taking the time to reflect and being held accountable for that.
It's so awesome because it's you just think about, I mean, if you think about the different people you've come in contact over the years, whether mentors, not officially, whether people who've made a difference in, just something that they did that made you change the way you behaved after that. It's just such a powerful tool that this idea of interacting with others and then having that experience or something in between that, as opposed to, I've read a lot of books. I've gone to a lot of conferences
we
and
all
things,
have.
and they've made an impact, but not.
And it's good stuff. Absolutely. Yeah.
But not quite the way that the learning by doing or being forced into, and going back to that word you used, mess.
Absolutely.
I love that. One of the things that I got to do is, could you talk about discovering that vitriolic debates among parents over mask mandates and curriculum aren't all that different from splits in the boardroom over budgeting and pandemic supply chain disruptions? I love this comment. that you start finding some common ground here, that we have.
Yeah.
We get angry about things.
Yeah. Well, we're certainly a society of strong beliefs. And when my beliefs butt up against your beliefs, my emotions tend to rise. And when my emotions rise, I'm less able to see my own blind spots. And when I lose all desire to see my own blind spots, all that matters is that I'm right and you're wrong. And when I'm right and you're wrong, we're no longer fighting problems, but we're fighting each other. And when we're fighting each other, boardrooms get stormed into, and leadership team members walk out of the room. That reality repeats itself over and over again today. So while we school leaders we're feeling burdened by all the anguish, particularly in the last 24 months, where it seems like all the stuff we were designed and empowered to do, we push off to the side, and now all of our energy is on, do we wear a mask, do we don't wear a mask? A parent calls and says, well, if you aren't going to make kids wear masks, then my kids aren't going to go. And then the other parent calls and says, if you're going to make kids wear masks, my kids are going to stay. And we as educators felt like we were sort of in a bubble. And then we listened to our colleagues in industry, and they're dealing with exactly the same stuff. I don't know that makes us feel any better, but it makes us feel less picked on. And so to have those conversations around, so how do you navigate your way through that? And to develop kind of our own perspective of how we navigate our way through that was probably more powerful than if I were just sitting in a room with 10 of my education colleagues trying to think through the same stuff.
That is so interesting because, and I could just see having these discussions and, because it is one of those things where you're not going to win because you got one side. I mean, in our state, we have a couple of school systems that never stopped going to school and never made a mask mandate. And they're in smaller communities, and the community said that's the way we wanted it. Well, just up the road, we had a meeting about this recently where two of the superintendents, complete opposite communities. The other community said, oh, you better make everybody wear masks. And you're so stuck in trying to deal with something like that. And, there is no, just as soon as you've answered the question for one person, then you're in trouble on the other side because the other side's upset. And I can imagine the types of things that you run into in the corporate world, in the business world, that happen the same way. And I got a feeling that you could feel that kind of respect coming when they realize some of the stuff that you deal with. So I like that. That's good stuff. It's anytime we can find a way to find a common ground, that we're actually not that far off from each other.
Right. Yeah.
That's good stuff. So let's talk a little bit. Let's go into this a little bit. I mean, why do you think working towards common solutions is difficult for some organizations?
Maybe it's difficult for all organizations. I don't want to oversimplify. As soon as, I'm going to ask Dave a question. He's got like 2 bullet points here, and that sounds really easy. So let's why didn't I think of that? But at the risk of oversimplifying here, Steve, let me use the visual of a tree. So a tree has leaves, a tree has a trunk, and a tree has roots underneath the ground. Roots represent my values and my beliefs and my passions and what I believe to be true. Those aren't on display, but those are kind of my anchors. And the more exaggerated the differences are at that root level, the more difficult it's going to be to arrive at some kind of common solution. The more aligned we are at that kind of rooted level, common values, common beliefs, common passions, the more likely we are to navigate our way towards a common understanding around purpose and vision. That's one piece. And then the second piece, when I think about coming up with common solutions, does speak to culture. I don't want to oversimplify this either. You know, the old notion, well, culture eats strategy for lunch. Well, we certainly know that toxic culture gobbles up any attempt to reach common understanding. And so why is it that some institutions seem to do a better job at aligning around common sense of vision and purpose and understanding? It's probably because at the rooted level, there's more commonality around values and beliefs. And that then breeds a culture that tends to be non-toxic, which then breeds at least mores and behaviors around this is how we carry on conversations and this is how we do our work. So I don't want to oversimplify that, but I do think if we were to put two organizations under the microscope, we would see some profound differences underneath the surface, which makes this happen.
Gotcha. You know, it's interesting because right now I would get some funny looks from my family for what I'm about to say, but I get a little excited about baseball. All right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. When I say excited, I mean, you know, I'm questioning what the decision-making abilities of the everyone from the umpires to the manager, and you know it's funny because you know that obviously is sports, and it's as my wife likes to tell me, you know, it is one game out of 162. Plus, what does it matter to you? You know, you're not getting paid, and you're not getting. But I bring this around to talk about sometimes what our individual thoughts are about what we're doing inside the company is, you know, or the organization is just, well, it's my idea, or it's I know I'm right, or something.
I know I'm right. Yeah.
We just run into that so often, which is what brings me to my next question, which is, you know, as a leader, some excel at bringing people together. I mean, they excel at bringing their constituents together, but other leaders don't. I mean, what do you think about that one?
Yeah. One of the things that when I talk about Rodger and his pedagogy, if we look at his content, the content is really just three buckets. The first bucket is you look yourself in the mirror and you ask yourself the question, so what makes me a leader worth following? So let's just stop there a minute, particularly as it relates to the ability to bring constituents together. So if I'm a leader that understands the power of listening, understands the power of dignifying the disgruntled voice, understands how important it is for me, the leader, to know what my blind spots are. If I'm a leader who can articulate a pretty razor-sharp focus on why we exist as an organization, kind of purpose and vision and so forth, then, you know, not all the heated discussions are going to go away, but now I'm anchored. I'm anchored in some cultural values that are important to me, where those values dignify the you, if you will, and we all understand what it is we're trying to do together. We actually have a better chance of coming up with a kind of a common understanding. So it really does go back to culture. It goes back to what's my sense of where power comes from in this organization. Does it come from me, the leader? Does it come from you working on the ground floor? It speaks to culture. So leaders who are better at coming up with a common understanding are doing it on a bed of mutual respect and understanding.
That's so powerful, because I think some of our compatriots, colleagues or whatever, just they've missed that boat. And it's one of those things that if you've ever been someplace where you go, yeah, I'm glad I'm just visiting and don't work here.
Yeah.
Then you get the feeling where I'm going with that, because it's
sure. Yeah.
One of the things that I'd got to make sure we talk about, and I wondered if you got into this in the when you were part of the Leading by Design program. What tips do you have for new organizational leaders for addressing controversial topics? Because we definitely have them today.
Yeah. Well, at the risk of repeating myself, but let me repeat myself. Everything we do does lie on the bed of institutional culture that we're trying to nurture. Everybody values their employees, they say, but do we value our employees? How do we know? How do we know that? Where are we getting our information from? What does it really mean that this is a safe place? We all say it's a safe place, but how do we know that it's a safe place? And as a leader, if I'm intentional about understanding whether or not this place is safe, whether or not we really value all employees, that's important. Where does brilliance come from in our organization? If our culture suggests that brilliance comes from one office, that speaks to the culture in this place. If our organization demonstrates that brilliance comes from multiple places throughout the organization, and that we empower brilliance because it comes from all, that speaks to this bed of how are we going to deal with controversial subjects. So you got a flavor now. You got a flavor. Well, okay, where would you rather deal with a difficult issue? One where the culture is really toxic, or one where we really do value people? So that's a piece of it. I think it's important that we develop a framework for how we fight problems rather than people, and maybe that's another conversation around how do you manage conflict and all of that. We could get to that at another time. But it is important that we have an understanding together for how do we deal. What framework are we going to use? And then we use that framework. So the more I lean into these difficult conversations, not only the easier is that, but it's the less defensive we get when we're leaning into those difficult conversations. And then, again, I don't want to oversimplify this, and I want to sound like this old guy who says, well, that too will pass. But quite frankly, that too will pass. It just does. And then finally, keep a sense of humor. My goodness, don't take yourself so seriously. Don't take yourself so seriously. If you can't look at each other and just, some of the mess we deal with, Steve, is so messy. I don't know if we're supposed to cry or laugh, but before we start crying, let's at least start laughing. Again, that's. I don't want to underestimate the power of just. Can't we just giggle sometimes about some of the stuff we're dealing with?
I love that. Sometimes it's so difficult for someone to see that there is actually some funniness here, and and if we could just do that, where we could have a nice little chuckle over whatever's caused us to be,
whatever it is,
yes,
whatever it
is, and then maybe see the commonality where whatever it is we're trying to address or whatever. And I think sometimes it's so difficult to bring people, for them to see that. That's why I brought up my baseball thing, because it's like, I swear that ump last night was just, he needs some glasses. But, the guy in front of me was rooting for the other team, so he may not.
We might have been watching the same game last night. I think we were.
I think we were too. But it's like, it's the same thing though when we work, because sometimes we just get so, we get so caught up in so much of it. And part of it's because we care. But I think if we can just see some funniness there someplace, that might help us get along with each other. So I love that. I like that a lot. Dave, this has been awesome talking with you. And before we close, could you let everyone know, or if you where they could find out more maybe about Leading by Design, and if you'd like them to connect with you?
Sure. Real easy. Just Google leadingbydesign.com. It's simple as that, and we'll take it from there.
Awesome. And I will make sure that is in the show notes so that they can find all that information there.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, I got two questions I'd like to ask that have nothing to do with what we've been talking about, but I just like to ask my guests.
Yeah.
And the first one is this: if you have so much going on that you become overwhelmed, how do you overcome the desire to quit?
Well, now I'm disappointed that you had two more questions, because I don't know where to start with this one here. Again, the desire to quit. We can't oversimplify that reality. And in my coaching sessions, I talk about the rat's gnaw. We end every one of them by saying, okay, the rat's gnaw is when you get up in the morning and you're taking a shower, what's eating away at your gut? Let's deal with that. That rat's gnaw used to be once a month. Now it's every other day, and it's a different rat every other day. So just keep coming at you. So for when somebody says, I don't know that I can do this anymore, let me remind that person, they're not the only one who's feeling that way right now. You don't stand alone. And in this business of education leadership, oftentimes we feel pretty isolated, particularly in times when we're at that point where we're not sure we can go any further. Period. So that's one. Find time to block out the noise, whatever it takes. You have your own strategy. Just whether it's, I don't look at emails from, midnight on Friday to midnight on Saturday, you figure it out, but you figure out a way to block out that noise for a while, just to clear your head. Find a critical friend, find somebody that you can just kind of get ugly with, and it's not going to come back to haunt you. Because sometimes you just kind of clean out your system, it's not going to come back to haunt somebody who knows your space and who has a sense for you as a person. And then step back and ask yourself, is there really another profession that I could engage in that would have such a profound impact on the world we live in tomorrow? My guess is most would find themselves saying, you know what, I think I'm going to hang in here, because I can't think of another profession that has a greater opportunity for a more profound impact on tomorrow than the one that I'm dealing with right now.
That is so powerful, because I think sometimes it all comes crashing down, or at least that's the way we feel. And then it's so tempting to give in to that feeling when,
it is.
If we could just put what you just said on a little placard above our door or something. Oh yeah. I like that, because it sometimes just can just feel that way, and it's like and it's one of those things where we need that escape, or we need that ability to readjust our thinking or something like that. So good stuff. Last question. Dave, do you have a teacher in your past who made a difference in your life? If so, who was it, and what would you say if given the chance to say thank you?
I do. Bob DeConey, U.S. government teacher, 1968. Bob, I've carried your passion for students, your love for learning, your sense of humor, and your ability to challenge the underperformed students with me for the past 55 years. Today, thousands of men and women who have been touched by me over the years carry a piece of you and your inspiration. We all thank you, Bob, from the bottom of our heart. I'm glad you asked that question, Steve. His name just quickly came to mind. Boom. He's still living today. He's 90-some years old.
Wow.
Maybe I can figure out a way to get him this message now that you asked me the question.
That would be cool. That would be cool. I always kind of kick myself because there's people who had an impact on me that I always wish I'd reached out to them.
Yeah.
And let them know. Thank you so much, Dave, for sharing that. And Dave, it was awesome talking with you. Thanks for introducing us to your experiences and Lead by Design and your thoughts about leading and addressing challenges. Wishing you the very best in all that you do.
Thank you so much, Steve. An honor to be with you today.
Teaching Learning Leading K12 is excited to be a member of Voice Ed Radio. Voice Ed Radio, your voice is right here. Teaching Learning Leading K12 is a proud member of the Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators, podcasts by educators. The opinions expressed on Teaching Learning Leading K12 are those of the guests and host. Teaching Learning Leading K12 is intended to share ideas, advice, and suggestions for classroom teachers and school administrators. Teaching Learning Leading K12 is produced for educational purposes. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll share it with your friends.